fall of Rome is one of the most popular topics in history, for many reasons, ranging from the invasions to the political drama and the shock of one of history's greatest empires collapsing in a short century. Well, the western half at least. Most people watching this video are already aware that while the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the year 476 with the deposing of Emperor Romulus Augustulus, the Eastern Roman Empire continued for nearly another millennia until the Ottomans conquered Constantinople in 1453. But even this clarification isn't a complete answer. At the time of Romulus Augustulus being deposed, the Western Roman Empire as a political entity was now over, but there were multiple areas ran by Roman authorities or Roman soldiers that still continued even with the fall of Rome itself. In addition, the usurper of Rome named Odoacer took the title of King of Italy in an effort to prevent any further power grabs at the title of emperor. Yet despite this, multiple people continued to claim to be a direct continuation of Western Roman authority, in some cases under a different title. Many of these claimants are either short-lived or relatively obscure, so you often don't hear much about them when discussing the fall of Rome in the early Middle Ages. So I thought it'd be fun to make a video going over some of these Roman holdouts, these Roman rump states, if you will. To help narrow things down, we're not talking about something as broad as a continuation of Roman-built cities or cultural practices in general, like seen in post-Roman Britain before the Anglo-Saxons arrived, but the level of an organized, singular political entity like a kingdom, or at least something closer to that. Okay, so Romulus Augustulus was put on the throne by his father, a Roman general named Orestes. The deposed emperor Julius Nepos fled to Dalmatia without ever officially giving up his title. From the Eastern Empire's perspective, they saw Nepos as the legitimate Western emperor, having never recognized Romulus Augustulus in the first place. Odoacer, meanwhile, was rather optimistically seen as a client of the East and heavily pressured to bring Nepos back to Rome to put him on the throne. Odoacer wasn't going to do that, but he played politics by using the title Rex, or King of Italy, to never take the throne himself and to hopefully remove any targets off his back. Odoacer, claiming to support the authority of the empire, nominally agreed to recognize Nepos to the extent of rhetoric and minting coins, but golly gee, he just never got around to getting the time. And so Nepos remained in Dalmatia, never having the proper resources to safely return to Rome and take back the original throne. So Nepos continued to rule a rump state in Dalmatia while claiming the title of Western Emperor for 4 more years, until he was murdered in the year 480. Hilariously, while we don't know the true murderer, one suspect is another former deposed emperor named Glycerius, because I guess any breadcrumb of empire was better than nothing? Regardless, Odoacer took this murder as an excuse to take over Dalmatia to bring justice for the emperor's murder, but then he got a bit over his head and invaded the Eastern Empire in 484. So the Eastern Emperor Zeno, while not being able to fully reconquer Italy, was able to get rid of Odoacer by hiring the Ostrogoths to do it. The Ostrogoths conquered Italy in 490 minus the city of Ravenna, which held out for another 3 years, in which Odoacer was then captured and killed. The Ostrogoths never bothered claiming to be the continuation of Rome, and Odoacer was never an official emperor, obviously, but at the very least he used Roman authority as justification for his rule. Nepos, meanwhile, was a former emperor who never gave up the title and had territory. You could argue he was the true final emperor depending on whether actually sitting on a throne in Rome matters or not. Part of the reason that Romulus Augustulus is recognized conventionally as the final emperor and not Nepos, despite recognition from Emperor Zeno, is kind of the political embarrassment of the situation. Rome had fallen and the supposed emperor couldn't even take it back or even get Eastern support to do it. As the East continued on and the shadow of the West faded further into obscurity, historians were recognizing Romulus Augustulus as the final Western emperor by the 6th century, and so it just kind of stuck. Although some historians these days will give it to Nepos, giving the Western Empire another 4 years of technically existing. How nice. Nearly 2 decades before the fall of Rome in 476, the Western Empire was having a minor resurgence under Emperor Majorian. In a short few years, Emperor Majorian defeated the Visigoths, the Suevi, and the Burgundians to reconquer huge swaths of territory. However, the Western Empire by this point was so used to corruption and civil war that Majorian wanted to make sure to keep military power in people he trusted. So naturally, this led to a corrupt general deposing him in 461 and causing another civil war. That's normal at this point. The civil war was between the generals that originally supported the now dead Majorian and the ones who supported his usurper Ricimer. One of the generals who supported Majorian, named Marcellinus, ran things in Dalmatia, hence why Julius Nepos was able to rule an organized entity there in the first place later on. Another general was one named Aegidius, who was in charge of things in northern Gaul. The Civil War of 461 didn't have a clear winner, so Aegidius was able to keep control of northern Gaul militarily. While Aegidius was loyal to the empire, he didn't submit to Ricimer, so in a way he was running things semi-independently from that point forward. With the further decline of the throne's prestige, local military rule was simply the most optimal way to keep any semblance of political order. Aegidius was able to diplomatically stay allied with the Franks in modern-day Belgium and a group of Alans in modern-day Orleans, so he could keep back the Visigoths in Aquitaine and the Burgundians in, well, Burgundy. Once Majorian's reconquests were undone, northern Gaul was essentially an island of Roman authority surrounded by other kingdoms. So when he died in 465, his son Syagrius took control of the region. Syagrius saw himself as loyal to the empire just like his father, keeping his official title of Magister Militum of Gaul, at least when the empire was still going. However, a lot of Syagrius' rule is a mystery, and after the fall of Rome, there were some referring to him as Rex Romanorum, or King of the Romans. 6th century historian Gregory Tours used this title for him, but a lot of contemporary historians doubt he took this title himself, given what we knew of his character, as well as the traditional Roman taboo against kingship. But as he outlasted both Romulus Augustulus and Julius Nepos, it's possible that perhaps the other German kingdoms simply called him King of the Romans because, well, he was the last one left. Either way, we don't know for sure. Even maps of his territory range from being just a small area around Novidunum in modern-day Soissons, France, to everything from the Ardennes forest to the Loire River. For my personal guess, we know he didn't control Brittany, the Franks had Belgium, the Alemanni and the Burgundians had areas out east, and the Alans still possessed some lands in modern-day Orleans, so it's probably closer to something in the middle like this, but again, we don't fully know. It's especially important to consider that many historians viewed him as an island of Roman civilization in a sea of barbarians, so while we know he existed, he could have been subject to exaggeration in terms of how powerful he actually was. Eventually, he wasn't able to keep things cordial with the Franks, and in 486 the Franks invaded his territory and defeated him at the Battle of Novidunum under King Clovis I. His so-called kingdom collapsed soon after, and Syagrius fled further south. The Visigoths captured him and sent him back to Clovis, who likely had him assassinated. Regardless, his military rump state in northern Gaul outlasted the fall of Rome by 10 years. So this one is definitely much more of a stretch, but an interesting bit of history nonetheless. As Western Roman authority declined, a lot of areas along the African frontier began to run things independently of the empire over time. Once the Vandals took control of Carthage, the Christian Berbers further south made their own kingdoms. One of the first to do so was a state historians refer to as the Mauro-Roman Kingdom, which controlled a large part of modern-day northern Algeria west of the Vandals. This wasn't done by a Roman general or former emperor, however. Despite using Roman systems and infrastructure left in place, it was its own entity that was a fusion of Roman and Berber culture and population. However, unlike post-Roman Britain, it appeared to have been organized as a singular kingdom. It likely established itself right around the fall of Rome, maybe even slightly afterwards. However, we do know that one of its later kings named Masuna, who ruled in the early 500s, officially styled himself as King of the Roman and Moorish people. Whether this was just his personal title or the title held by every Mauro-Roman king since their foundation isn't known. The kingdom's end is about as mysterious as its beginning, with it ending likely around the year 600, although other similar Christian Berber kingdoms would pop up in early medieval times in North Africa. This one, though, was the largest one. While no one would consider them as any official continuation of the empire, I felt it was interesting enough to include anyway as an example of how the Roman legacy continued well after the empire itself fell. With how quickly most of these Roman rump states fell, it's easy to see why a lot of history classes might skip them altogether to just move on to medieval times. But I think it adds an interesting aspect to the fall of Rome, where rather than this idea of the Western Empire sort of being reduced to Italy and then snuffed out like a candle, the built-in-place Roman infrastructure and society was so well ingrained that even with centuries of decline, it was still able to hold out in several areas on their own, almost like nothing happened for several years. Rome wasn't built in a day, and it wasn't destroyed in one either. Speaking of which, it's been a while since this channel has had a Vote the Treaty or Vote the Partition video, so I thought it would be fun for the next one to be the Partition of Rome. You're going to do Diocletian's job of figuring out how to split the Roman Empire into the Tetrarchy. First, you'll vote on which areas of the empire will belong to one of the 4 tetrarchs. The top 3 voted regions for each tetrarch will be their domain, whatever they end up being. Then as an even crazier twist, you'll choose which tetrarchs you want to be together. Will it be the same west-east split? Will it be a north-south split? Maybe you'll do some weird diagonal thing. You decide. The link to the voting survey is in the description, and a video showing the results will be out on August 30th. See you guys then!